Welcome to Brave Inflections. My name is Claudelle, and today I have a very, very special guest with us, Dr. Natasha Winkler-Titus. We go way back. Natasha, I don't know if you know this, but your older sister and I share a birthday.
I do. And we all used to do ballet together.
Oh, yes. Those were the days indeed. Thank you so much for making the time to have a conversation with me today. Natasha is quite an accomplished individual. She's got a doctorate in psychology, and we had a chat earlier on. It's like work psychology is the terminology that you'll hear quite a bit in our interview today. She's got over 25 years of experience in the corporate world at senior executive level, locally here in South Africa, as well as internationally, globally. And also, very importantly, the president-elect of SOHOPSA. And this is the Society for Work Psychologists. So, Natasha, can I start with this question? Most people are familiar with the term shrink because we hear that in the movies, right? But work psychologist, what is that? Can you give us some insight?
So, yes, Claudelle, we are shrinks in all matter of terms. But I would feel quite privileged if people referred to me as a shrink, because we are not always seen, with the clipboard and the sofa, because we are actually in the workplace, whether in a factory or a corporate office. We are situated there. So we very seldom have people coming and lying on our sofas. But for all intent and purposes, yes, we are qualified psychologists. We are registered as health professions with the Health Professions Council. It is quite a journey. It takes you about a good 7 to 8 years to register and qualify as a psychologist. So we at the same level as doctors, although we don't have the title as doctor at our master's level, only when you complete a PhD. So we also apply the principles of psychology to the context of work. So we would, for example, use psychological methods and instruments to aid people and groups in a work context. We look at mental processes, we look at personality adjustments of not only individuals, but groups in the work context. We apply psychotherapeutic methods to respond to behavior and personality challenges in the workplace. And as behavioral scientists, our role is really to understand, to modify, to enhance work behavior, to ensure, Claudelle, the effective functioning of an organization. Yes, so the scope of practice, and I really love the sentence that is in the HPCSA Standards of Training. It says, clinically explain, assess, and influence human behavior and its reciprocity at individual, group, and organizational level, with all efforts directed at human flourishing. And I just thought that is such a beautiful definition. So in essence, Claudelle, we are not just counselors and scientists analyzing or sitting in a corner looking at people and analyzing their psychological well-being or work behavior. We actually function in the same areas and processes as HR practitioners. So we complement the HR practitioner and work alongside them to understand organizational psychology. And that is basically the culture of the organization, how they deal with and facilitate organizational change. We look at work design, the fit of the person to the position and the work that they need to do and the capability that they have, and effectiveness in that space. We also look at personnel psychology, which are areas in recruitment and assessment, performance, how people perform and why they under or overachieving. We look at what motivates behavior. So when you think about recognition processes and methods, we look at the science in terms of human motivation. And we also get involved in employee relations, and especially insofar as conflict resolution and group dynamics are concerned. In Career psychology, we often work with young adults in helping them find their interest and niche to match them to the best possible career. And we also look at employee well-being in the workplace. Most people are familiar with us with psychometric assessments, but the tools and methodologies we use, the instruments we use is really about applying it in the context of work and human flourishing. And then there are also certain specialized areas where organizational psychologists work, and this could include ergonomics, executive and individual coaching. In the area of ethics and business ethics, we function. Humanitarian psychology, that is psychology in the interest of making a social impact. And also a new area that's gaining quite a bit of prominence, the study of brain and the area of neuroscience in the workplace.
Wow, thank you very much. So let me go on to the next question. Natasha, we are in unprecedented times. Are you concerned about the psychological effects that the times that we are in are on people? And can you also just talk to me about what advice do you have for leaders in general and HR practitioners in particular? And what are the key things that they should be focused on in terms of going through the process that we're going through now?
Yes, Claudelle, I am most certainly, I won't say concerned, because I seldom get concerned or stressed about things. I always think you need to relax, take a breath, and do the best you can do. I do see that there is a big focus. So even from government point of view, the psychology beyond the workplace, so counseling and clinical psychology, there is a measure of response. I don't think it's completely optimal, but there is a measure of response to the pandemic that also look at the psychological wellness and well-being of our people. But yeah, if I need to think about psychology in the workplace, and then for leaders and HR practitioners specifically, look, the first thing I would start off with is compassion. You can never go wrong, Claudelle, with compassion. If we can all just get over ourselves and just spare one or two thoughts to the next individual and try and understand their circumstances and put yourself in their shoes, the world would be such a better place. So the first thing I would just say is be kind, be gentle, have compassion. But back to the definition of my scope of practice, we look at organizational behavior. Now, what is organizational behavior? If you look at the human being, we look at motivation and learning. It sounds simple, but it's quite complex from a psychological point of view. Motivation is the mental and emotional processes that precede actual behavior. So what is going on in your head, in your brain? What is going on in your psyche, in your emotions, and how does that translate into what you do? And it is very important that psychologists in the workplace need to assist their leaders and HR practitioners to understand what motivates people. Okay? If we understand that, we will know how to deal and motivate them. Secondly, learning is another inherent thing in our psychology, because learning is the actual behavior. So it's how we respond, what we do, how we change our behavior. We call it learning, and we're oversimplifying it when we talk about learning, because people think learning and development or training. But learning is really any time you change your behavior. And before you can change your behavior, you need to change your mindset. So those are the two important things to set the context for organizational behavior. What I'm observing in the space that we're in, and by the way, my PhD was also centered on unplanned change. So I also looked at a moment in time of crisis and unprecedented things that forced an organization to change. So what I often observe in these type of situations is that there's really a massive focus on survival. And because we're in survival mode, we have what I call tactical responsiveness. So it's kind of just focus on the bare minimum and the basics to get us to the next step and the next step, which is not necessarily wrong. I mean, man was made for survival. But I think what we should just spare a moment to, and that's what I would urge leaders to do, is to be mindful in what you do. So even though it's about the survival now, we must remember that any behavior, any decision we take now will have a consequence, and it will have, and oftentimes if we could make the right decision for now, but if we don't think through the consequence or the impact of that decision, often it can lead to unintentional consequences. And from a change point of view, that is often what we struggle with. We don't understand the impact of our decisions, and then later on have to deal with the unintentional consequences. Also, what is happening at the moment, and Claudelle, you would also, this would resonate with you. From an ethical point of view, we are facing unprecedented moral and ethical dilemmas right now. I mean, you open a newspaper, even the government is not immune to this. There's the whole thing about freedom versus lockdown. You know, it's almost polar opposite. Our constitution gave us our rights and freedom back after what we've been through, and now we're being locked down. It's an ethical dilemma. Biological and or versus economic life. I mean, the debate, and it's still raging, you know, which industries can open up, what are happening to people that can't work. Fair distribution of resources. Again, what is fair? What is fairness? There are some organizations that are really going through tough times now when we're staring redundancies and retrenchments and business rescue, and ComAir is already in business rescue. Do I pay my employees? Do I pay my suppliers? I mean, they're all in the same boat. They have families to feed. But these are the dilemmas that our leaders are facing now. Some corporates are returning back to work, but maybe not all employees are essential services. So is it okay that some people are allowed back to work and others must continue working from home? There is no absolute right or wrong answer, and that's what makes leadership interesting and exciting and difficult. The moral principle that I always live by is never make exceptions for yourself. If you have an expectation of your people, be sure you can follow that. And I'm thinking that the name is totally left me now, but one of the aides of the British Prime Minister, he was in the news the other day for getting in his car and driving out to take his family to his parents on the farm. And he, you know, at no point, Claudelle, did he actually apologize or say, I'm in the wrong. He justified, and it was about his interpretation of what's right and wrong and how the rules were enforced. Another thing that they should be mindful of is just the mental and emotional responses. In our chat earlier, you were talking about, as an introvert, you thought, yay, perfect life, I love working from home. But it's not always as simple. Just because somebody's an introvert or extrovert, it doesn't necessarily going to make them immune to what's going on. So in terms of mental and emotional responses, I mean, all of this, not only the virus, but the whole psychological impact that came with it, came with fear, it came with loss, it came with uncertainty and ambiguity. And I'll share with you an acronym. David Rock is a well-known neuroscientist, and he termed the phrase SCARF. And when you go through transitions, we often use it when we do organizational change, but it's an ideal acronym to keep in mind in these times as well. S stands for status. Every person wants status. And when I talk status, I'm not talking in the popular definition of wanting to be seen or wanting to be up on stage. Status is just acknowledgement. And in our South African languages, we've got the beautiful greeting, Sawubona. Sawubona means, I see you. It is just for me the most beautiful. It's not saying hello, it's saying, I acknowledge you, I see you. And each person, all of us at our core as a human, want to be acknowledged. We want to be seen. So give that to your employees, each one of them. People also want certainty. the C in SCARF stands for certainty. We do not live in a time where there's certainty at the moment. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows when's this going to be done with, etc. We can speculate. We can build models. We do the data. So we have ideas, but we don't have certainty. So how do you give certainty in a time like this? The simple answer is give people a future, give them meaning, give them something to look forward to, or some way that they can have an impact. The A stands for autonomy. And again, we don't have control, but do we? I believe each of us have control, irrespective of the circumstances we find ourselves in. We do have control. We have control over how we feel. We have control over our emotions, our response. But a leader can also give people control. So, for example, this working from home thing, if they at least give their people autonomy over their schedule, how they choose to do their work. This is not normal. We cannot expect a normal 9 to 5 days, because suddenly you have mothers and children stuck in the same. So you are a tutor and you're an employee and you're a mom all in one. So there is no normal. So give them a sense of control to set their own schedule at least. The R stands for relatedness. It's in our human DNA to want to relate with other people. So relatedness just basically speaks to a sense of feeling safe with others. And fortunately or unfortunately, it does ask for a lot of trust. So if you had an organization where trust was really a problem, it's going to be 10 times worse in a virtual setup. So do work at your most to make sure people feel safe. They feel safe in the team, they feel safe in the organization. And then lastly, the F stands for fairness. And you know, we've just spoken about what is fair. There is no fair. So again, when we think about judicial psychology, leaders and HR must work their best to try and make sure people feel that there's a sense of fairness. You know, simple things. I've noticed some of my colleagues in corporate environments, if you're expecting people to work from home, is everybody working from home equally? So we have just spoke, you and I are virtual collaborators. So we are set up, we've got the technology, we've got fiber, etc. Not everybody's in that position. So if you are expecting people to be productive, make sure they are empowered. Do they have headsets? Do they have the technology? Do they have data? You know, all of those things. And because if one person is going to be better set up, they will be in a better position to perform. Now, that's not fair. So in terms of fairness, think about that. Another element of mental and emotional responses I would think about, one thing that I've really picked up in this time is boundary management. I think it's gotten better, but it has been extremely difficult, especially in that first 21 days. And we just call it boundary management. That is that whole line. Look, we struggled with work-life balance even before a lockdown, but it obviously was just even worse now that everybody's working from home, working long hours, sending emails at 11 p.m., and etc., etc. Now, if you're a leader who loves working in the evening or do most of your admin stuff late at night, that's your control over your own schedule. But if you're going to send an email at 11 p.m., you will have team members that ignores it and look at it tomorrow morning, which is what you want them to do. But you will have team members that get paranoid and feel they have to jump up and deal with it now because you sent it now. And that has a psychological impact. Simple things. Learn the technology. There's a way in your mail system where you can still do your mails, but you delay or you schedule when it is delivered. So things like that, you know, try and help people manage their own boundaries. So I wrote a blog about this, Claudelle, when I observed it, and I observed it not even in the work context. I observed it amongst our friends. We had cell group meeting, and the one evening, one lady just had a meltdown, and it went on the next day, and it's all about her stupid audio on her laptop that cannot be fixed. And we've had IT out there and everything. But her response for me was exaggerated. It's like, oh, come on, it's just your audio sitting on your laptop. But what it really is about, our brain is made up of certain compartments. And we all think the brain works in an integrated way. It does. It's got neurons that flip. But your emotions go into a certain area and your logical thinking go into another area, and et cetera, et cetera. So usually we think we have stories. Our memories are stored as a story, but it's not a story. It's actually little bits of pieces that the brain quickly puts together when you call up a memory. And that is why sometimes our memories can shift and change and adjust, because our experience is compounded. But what happened in the technology breakdown is we are so compounded with emotions. We're in a heightened emotional state that our neurons are on fire in our brains. And every time something happens, or you had to see your friend behind a mask, the neurons are firing up. So a silly thing as I cannot connect, or I lost connection, or I didn't hear you properly on the thing, can totally take you through the roof and just create a technology meltdown. And these are the things leaders in HR need to be aware of and sensitive and have compassion and allow people to feel safe. That as what just happened here, hey, we froze, let's try that again. So yeah, that's kind of what I would tell leaders. And more than ever, a leader shouldn't feel, they shouldn't have the superhero complex. You do not have to have all the answers at this point in time. I have a lot of respect for one of the things that our president did in surrounding himself with experts and consulting far and wide, and not came to us with the definitive answer on how we're going to resolve COVID-19. And that is what good leadership is. Give people safety, give them compassion, give them a hope for the future, and let them work with you to resolve it.
And it sounds to me like you had significant foresight in deciding on your PhD topic, as it's like perfect for this time, right? Living in uncertainty and having to find our way. And I make reference to us having to find our way, navigate our way through a maze with moving walls. So it's not just the maze, the walls keep on moving and becoming more and more difficult to give people that certainty that you made reference to. So you've talked about where we are now and the kinds of things that leaders and HR professionals should be aware of. I quite like the idea of don't think you're a superhero, and tap into the expertise of other people. Because I do tend to worry a bit that there are a lot of people in leadership positions who think that they must fix things, everything, and they should be in control of everything. Whereas we barely able to control ourselves through everything and manage us and lead ourselves through everything. And everything that you mentioned in terms of the emotional responses. It's not just the people that you leading, the people you leading through the process that you need to be concerned about. I suppose there's a leading of self that needs to happen in the process as well, So even if you're a very senior person, you still have the emotional responses because you're a human being.
We are all human, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's tough. You've got to worry about the people that who you're leading through the process, and you've got to manage yourself through very, very difficult circumstances. But hopefully at some point, things, the dust will settle. So if in this context, if we were to look a little bit into the future, are you worried, or do you think we should be worried about worms crawling out of the woodwork later on when the dust is settled, or do you think we'd be okay?
So I think you're implying about psychological consequences of a disaster.
Yes.
I definitely. I mean, if you just go to the basic principle of and disasters and trauma, and the trauma in this situation. I mean, that's where the term was coined, post-traumatic stress. So I definitely think, yeah, there will still be consequences for a long time, but it's very different and people will experience it very differently. So firstly, there's an element of the level of trauma you experienced. I think, Claudelle, you and I are extremely fortunate and extremely blessed. The 21 days of lockdown was really not, it was no major issue. Yes, it had an impact, but not the same impact it would have on the person in the township that had no source of income, nothing, no resources, no technology. So it's really, you can't compare it. So the level of post-traumatic stress would be different. Then there's also the alternative argument. Somebody would say, but the person in the township that has that generally would be more resilient than we would, because they are tougher, they've learned to deal with different types of challenges that we've become soft, if I can put it that way. So post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic responses are definitely going to be different for different people. Just the example of, that I've lost an uncle last week, somebody that was extremely close to me. It's still not resolved. I mean, I cannot be with the family. We don't even know when we could do a memorial, etc., because now there's a compulsory, autopsy that needs to be done. So a death certificate is not issued. My cousin is stuck in Cape Town. His eldest son, he can't be with his mum. So, just the way, and we don't all do our grieving in the same way. Different cultures have different rituals to grieve and to deal with the bereavement. Those processes have now been impacted, so we don't have it. Yes, we are coping and we're making the best, but we will have to mourn. So there's different ones. I mean, I'm just referring to the funeral. But they're different things that people are going to be stressed about. But, Adam Grant, he's a very popular work psychologist, and he writes a lot, and he's a professor in the area. He also talks about post-traumatic growth. So we shouldn't just think about post-traumatic stress as a bad thing. There's also post-traumatic growth, because in the challenge, when we go through that challenging time, we grow and we learn and we become more resilient and we learn new coping mechanisms. And for me, post the effect, what people need to realize is the inner strength and the deeper sense of gratitude that was born out of this trauma. And they shouldn't just let it pass. They must reflect on it and they must build on it. We've also, just at a practical level, we've seen innovative ways that people have reinvented themselves, new ways of working, new ways of doing. And people must take that and they must run with it, and they must craft it into business models and new ways of living. But coming back to the post-traumatic stress, there's also, and I spoke earlier about boundary management, but we've known, even pre this thing, work-life balance has been an issue. But I think work-life balance is an oversimplified term. I actually don't prescribe to work-life balance. I talk about work-life flow, because we all have different priorities. And as long as what you're doing is in flow with what your priorities are, and it leads to personal wellness, then you are in flow. So for one person, us working 11 hours is we have no family life. Whereas for us, this is positive because we're contributing to our profession and we are helping people in our profession. So that whole boundary management and work-life balance has again come under the spotlight, and it has made us think differently. I mean, why can't moms not work from home and have more quality time with their kids? Why can't dads travel less and do more video conferences so that they have 6 to 9 walking time or things like that? Job-related stress. Oh my goodness, Claudelle. Because with the economic impact, redundancies, retrenchment is a reality. We are going to face it, and we know during retrenchments and redundancies, we have a thing that we focus on the economic side. So we focus on people's retrenchment packages. We help them set them up for a new career, but very seldom do we address the psychological impact a retrenchment has on people. I often do retrenchment counseling, because it's not just their economic security that people lose. They lose that sense of rhythm. For years, for 20 years, they had this structure and this cycle of life. Suddenly it's gone. They had a network, they have friends, they had a routine. All of that is gone. So those are the top things. The safety, reintegrating back into the workplace while the virus is still out there, or having to work behind the mask. I must be honest, with all of this, the worst thing for me is this mask thing, because if I can't see somebody smile, I feel so disconnected. Depression, the post-traumatic depression that could come from all of this. I made an interesting observation. My husband, I was observing, and I know I shouldn't do that, but I observed my husband when at the start of the 21 days, and he had to work from home. And there was this initial adjustment of, he had to connect. It's like every 5 minutes he's talking to his boss, or he had to feel, I am relevant, I'm connected. But very quickly, he settled into this mode, because we were working from home. So we'll have our rituals in the morning. We will do our training together. He's downstairs, I'm upstairs. Lunchtime, we meet, we have lunch together. And he very quickly became quite used to working in this way and us spending all this quality time. He was also quite productive, because he found that he could do so much more in a day. Then I watched him as he had to reintegrate back. And as much as he was excited to go back to the workplace, but there was also that almost a little bit of a loss that he had to deal with. And I watched how he went through all of this emotion. And I also observe it in kids. When I have Zoom calls with my friends or my nephews, and these kids that have now been stuck with their mummies for 60 days plus, how difficult. They can't even reach out. They are so clingy, as much as they want to get out, but they're also so, comfortable. So there's these adjustment disorders that we are also going to have to. And for some, it'll be, funny, as I've just mentioned, but in some instances, it will be quite traumatic, Claudelle.
So then what I'm hearing you saying is that there really is a combination of things that will come out of this. On the one hand, there are some negative things that we will have to deal with, but there are also lots of positive things, and we need to be careful that we don't overemphasize the negative things. But I get what you're saying about, the masks and not being able to see the person's whole face, because that's how we operate as human beings. We don't just listen to the voice coming through. You're also looking for all these nonverbal cues. This is one of the things that I've been finding difficult with webinars, is not being able to see my audience and see how they're responding. And you're just speaking into what feels like a vacuum. And then where the kids are concerned, I often wonder what this would mean for them in the future, because every generation is shaped by what plays out in their circumstances during their childhood. So this is going to have a profound impact on the current generation growing up. And I suppose we will only fully see the picture emerging when we go into the future. Very, very interesting finding that balance. And I was talking to somebody the other day about how does your culture get impacted upon when you've had your people go away, getting used to a different rhythm, and now having to come back and readjusting to that rhythm. And I am watching that with absolute fascination. One of the fortunate ones will just keep on, my rhythm will remain the same. but watching how the rhythm changes around me for other people is quite interesting. So if I were to organize a meeting between you and the president of this country, what advice would you give Mr. Ramaphosa today?
Yeah, I think I'll be too intimidated to even attempt to give him advice. Claudelle, I would start off with giving him so much compassion. We are not allowed to hug at this point in time, but we have to find ways of means to communicate our love. So the first thing I would do is just give him a virtual hug or compassion. I think beside the circumstances, on top of the circumstances, I have respect for how he has dealt with the situation and how he has composed himself. And the biggest thing, obviously, for me was the fact that he allowed his humanity to come through. He didn't pretend to be a superhero, and then we observed him at times of weakness when he was also just too exhausted to do a proper interview. So I would just give him compassion. I think if I had the audacity to give him and all the learned people around him advice, obviously that this is not just a pandemic of biological nature or an illness, it's a psychological phenomenon, not just with the pandemic, but with the situation and how we deal with it, that there is a very strong psychological phenomenon that we have to deal with. I do think to some extent they have tried to deal with it and manage it and put things in place. But I think maybe not as much as we can do. Okay. The other thing that I find quite interesting is we've got this task team, we've got the COVID-19 task team, and we've got different committees and groups, and you've got your ministerial body that's dealing with things. We must remember that even temporary task teams function in an organizational way. So for all intent and purposes, whether they are together for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, they are an organizational team. And all the same behavioral dynamics and the psychological issues that you deal with in a normal organization will be in this temporary organization. So it will, the psychopathology of stress and burnout and depression and other psychological traumas will also surface in this temporary team. So it would probably stand him in good stead to have organizational psychologists just working with the team and the temporary organization. Another thing, and I do have a lot of respect for that, is the use of science and data to inform what we do. I mean, we've seen now that smart people is even taking them to court and saying you've made rulings that are not scientifically founded and grounded. So I'm very happy that we are, and it also created an educational process, so the entire nation suddenly knows about science and data science and etc. It was really brilliant. I would, however, just caution, there is something called algorithm bias, and we know that. We know it from the Facebook days, we know it from the big data stuff. So all this big data can also have bias inherent in the process of coming up with the data and the science. What we must remember, humanity is complex. As much as we study the human, I always say I've had 30 years of psychology, learning and experiencing and working, and I don't think I understand people at all. So we as human beings are extremely complex, not just because we are made so beautifully, fearfully, wonderfully made, but also because there's so many things that inform how we think, how we do. We are so interconnected with the entire system that we're in. So we must remember that the data and the science has to work in the context And I think that was a lot of the criticism that would come through would be around us following blindly what first world countries are doing, because this is what the science says, so we have to do the same, while our circumstances and our context and our people are so different as well. So I would just be mindful, and not just for the president, but for leaders in general. Use the big data, let the data science inform your decisions, but never do it out of context of what the situation and who's in that situation. Donald Chern talks about active reflection, and I love that. And it's you are reflecting while you are acting, and I like to call it running on water. As you know, we have a history of, we are runners, so we love running. Yeah. And I always talk to, when I deal with my clients in change, I always tell them I'm running on water, because I'm doing and I'm acting, I'm getting things done, but I know I'm getting it done, not on a very firm foundation, but on water, because things are changing the whole time. Just because you're doing one change doesn't mean there's not 100 little changes. So you have to be so mindful of everything that you are doing. So that's one other thing. I also think, I take sustainability quite seriously, but not in the way that we define sustainability in terms of, your normal, your environmental sustainability. When I think about sustainable, I think about being significant, about making sure what you do today has a legacy and it can help others to also be successful. That's the definition of significance. So I think we have to be very mindful about what is happening now, what we are learning now. We need to take it with us in the future. So the other question I would pose to him is, who's capturing the learning out of this? Does he have a group of anthropologists in the corner just observing all these signs? So not necessarily capturing only the scientific and the medical intelligence, but capturing the intelligence of what we learn about disaster management, what do we learn about risk management, what do we learn about people and their resilience. So just who's capturing this? Who is testing and exploring new ways of being? Because we all had to cope. I mean, I don't even have to explain that. We were forced into work at home, be a full-time mom, tutor, everything. So this was an unplanned forced change. But in it, because that's human beings are resilient, we cope, we learn to, be adaptable. And we found new ways of surviving and coping, and some of these new ways could probably be better than what we used to do. So who's testing it and making sure, can't we take these things forward? So just from a government point of view, I mean, we've seen with the SASA situation, I mean, it shone so much light on the things that are really, really bad in our country that shouldn't be. Not in an age of technology. How do you have old people queuing and dying in queues? It's unacceptable. So are we going to be post-corona going to sort that out and make sure that nobody ever has to die in a queue waiting for a few R100? So who's looking at this and seeing how we can improve going forward? We've seen amazing, like you would normally see in these circumstances, you see amazing goodwill coming up. But why must we always have goodwill and compassion when disasters strike? Why can't we just be compassionate always? Why can't there always be systems in place to allow us to be good human beings? Hopefully I won't put all of this on the president, but I certainly think it's things that we can think about and take away from this experience.
Wow, you started off by saying that you would feel too intimidated, and then you go and you put so many things on the table that I think maybe I should send this recording to the president and he'll benefit from it. I think what was very enlightening from what you said is I don't think most of us really consider the team around the president and the psychological dynamics around that team. Like you, I've also been watching him and thinking, wow, rather him than me.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't want to have to deal with that responsibility, and it is a huge responsibility. And there's times that you have actually seen how tired he is. And when one looks at South Africa as a country, we have all these diverse views, you know, so and you hear people pulling in different directions, and then I think, oh, if I were the president having all these different opinions on the table, how would I deal with that? But there's certainly a lot of food for thought that you've put on the table. You know, so if I think back over this conversation that we've had, there's a lot of very good advice for leaders. People have got to take their teams through the change, the uncertainty, HR practitioners who have to advise within the organization. But you also touch on a lot of things that we need to think about outside of organizations as a society. You know, like very importantly, you see, like, why can't we just have goodwill all the time? Why does it take a disaster for us to get to that point? Certainly a lot of learnings. I've learned a lot from just listening to you today. And as you said earlier on, you know, there's a lot of things that it takes a mind shift. So in many respects, I think we need to shift our minds more than just a little bit, but take the learnings forward so that we don't just come through this with despair. But there's a hell of a lot that we're learning in the process, and hopefully there are academic institutions who are listening to this and saying, okay, we will be the scribe, even though the president has not appointed us, because we shouldn't be waiting for the president to think about everything. You know, there are institutions that could be busy with the recording now.
Encouraging. I mean, putting on my psyopsa hat now, we are a professional society, so we do engage quite with academic as well as with practitioner. So just from a psyopsa point of view, for example, there is quite a bit of research on the go on different streams. I know that SISA, who's the psychological body of South Africa, has also done quite a few interventions and processes in place, and there's also research. So yes, I do. As much as I say, and as I say, don't think it all fits with the president, has to think about everything, but I definitely think there is intelligence, and it's about us just harnessing it for the greater good.
Absolutely, and I think that the most important point is, for me, is how do we ensure that when we come out of this, that we take the learning with us, that this was a significant disruption, but we will later on look back at it as a necessary disruption for the quantum leap that we needed to take. And let's take that quantum leap. So I think we are at an inflection point. And as I always say, inflection points is where you need to make a decision whether you're going to go forward positively or negatively. Here we need to make decisions as a collective. We all have to work together to make humanity better, but also make the environment within which we find ourselves, whether you think about it as the natural environment, your organizational environment, the societal environment, a better place for all. Natasha, thank you so much. I really appreciate the fact that you have had this conversation with me. There's so many nuggets in there. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have to watch it a few times before all the pennies drop for me, because I could certainly hear that there's a lot of things that we need to think about, consider, take the learning, and take our organizations forward. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.